Good evening, dear friends, and a very warm welcome to each and every one of you. Wherever you're listening from tonight, maybe tucked safely under the blankets, curled up in your favorite quiet spot at home, or perhaps lying somewhere peaceful while the rest of the world slowly fades into the background. I'm so happy you're here with me. Take a slow, deep breath in and let it out gently. Feel your shoulders soften and drop. Maybe pull the blanket or duvet up a little higher and allow the day to quietly slip away from you. London fog lay thick upon the city that autumn evening. At 221B Baker Street, Holmes sat idle, craving challenge. Then came the urgent knock at the door. Sir Reginald Thorne found dead beneath Southwark Bridge, his body mangled with claw-like wounds, as if torn by some infernal beast. Scotland Yard saw a simple case of misadventure in the fog. But Holmes saw a link, a peculiar residue of phosphorescent powder on the victim's coat. One link in a chain that would bind a killer. The game is afoot. Chapter 1. The First Link. I set down these events as they occurred in the autumn of 1892, when the chill mists of London seemed to harbour secrets darker than usual. My friend Sherlock Holmes had been in one of his languid moods for days, the coal fire crackling steadily in the grate at 221B Baker Street, casting long, flickering shadows across the cluttered sitting room. The sharp scent of strong tobacco drifted from the Persian slipper, where he kept his shag mingling with the damp, heavy fog that seeped through every crack around the windows. Mrs. Hudson had just carried up a tray of hot tea, its bitter steam curling upward in the bitter cold of the room, when a sharp rap sounded from the 17 steps below. Holmes sprang to his feet at once, his lean frame silhouetted against the soft hiss of the gaslight. "Ah, Watson, at last! A visitor to break this infernal monotony!" The door flew open, and Inspector Lestrade entered, his rough tweed overcoat glistening with moisture, and carrying the unmistakable odour of coal smoke and wet streets. He stamped his boots on the mat, dislodging bits of cold mud from the cobbles, and held out a crumpled telegram. "Evening, gentlemen," Lestrade said, his voice rough against the patter of rain on the window panes. "I've a queer business on my hands. Sir Reginald Thorne, the banker, was found dead under Southwark Bridge at first light. Body badly torn, deep gashes across the chest and arms, as though some wild animal had been at him. We're inclined to call it misadventure, a fall in the fog perhaps, but his widow is adamant it was murder." Holmes took the telegram, steepled his long fingers beneath his chin, and scanned it rapidly. The paper felt crisp, yet slightly damp, still holding the faint metallic scent of fresh ink. I poured Lestrade a cup of the steaming tea. Its bitter warmth seemed to steady him as he accepted it gratefully. "What makes Lady Thorne so certain of foul play, Inspector?" I asked, settling back into my worn leather armchair, which creaked comfortably beneath me. Lestrade sipped, the firelight dancing in his eyes. "The wounds look inhuman, claw marks almost, and there are ugly rumours circulating of a demon that haunts the bridge at night. Superstitious nonsense, in my opinion. But she wired Scotland Yard insisting we consult you, Holmes. Says you're the only man in London who can cut through such fog-bound folly." Holmes began to pace rapidly before the hearth, his slippers making soft whispers on the carpet. "Nonsense or not, Lestrade, I require data. Data. I cannot make bricks without clay. We must examine the scene without delay." Within a quarter hour, we were rattling through the fog in a hansom cab, the iron-shod wheels clattering loudly over the wet cobbles like irregular drumbeats. The thick mist pressed close, heavy with the muddy reek of the Thames and the acrid bite of coal smoke pouring from 100 chimneys. Big Ben tolled somewhere in the distance, its deep notes muffled and ghostly. We descended to the riverbank beneath Southwark Bridge. Gas lamps threw feeble yellow halos into the gloom, barely penetrating the bitter fog. The air tasted of salt, decay, and river mud. The damp chill crept beneath collars and cuffs. A pair of constables stood guard, their heavy boots crunching on the gravel path that led down to the muddy foreshore. Sir Reginald's body lay beneath a tarpaulin, but Holmes insisted the covering be removed at once. He knelt in the cold mud, which soaked darkly through the knees of his trousers, and produced his magnifying lens. The sight beneath the sheet was hideous. 5 deep parallel lacerations raked across the chest and throat, the flesh ragged and torn as though by talons. The metallic tang of blood mingled with the sharp carbolic odour the police had used in a vain attempt to preserve the scene. Holmes ran his fingertips lightly along one of the wounds. The texture was rough, almost serrated. "Observe, Watson, these are not the marks of any natural beast, too regular, too deliberate in their spacing and depth." I bent closer despite myself. A distant foghorn moaned across the black water, sending an involuntary shiver along my spine. Lestrade stood a pace behind us, breath clouding in the cold. "What do you make of it then, Holmes? A madman with a gardening fork?" Holmes shook his head and drew thoughtfully on his pipe. The rich, comforting aroma of tobacco momentarily overpowered the foul river smells. "No, Inspector. Look here, the curious residue clinging to the lapels of his coat." He pointed to a faint greenish luminescence that showed even in the weak gaslight. With a small knife, he scraped a sample into a glass vial. The vial felt smooth and icy in his palm. We climbed back to the bridge roadway itself. The iron railing was slick with rain and felt bitterly cold under my gloved hand. Footsteps of late-night wayfarers echoed behind us, their umbrellas swaying like black spectres in the mist. Holmes crouched to study the ground near where Thorne must have gone over. "The first link, Watson," he murmured. "This phosphorescent powder is uncommon, used chiefly in stage effects or certain chemical demonstrations. Not something a respectable banker would carry on a casual evening stroll." Lestrade gave a short, sceptical laugh that cut through the rumble of passing hansoms overhead. "A link leading where exactly? The poor devil simply slipped in the fog." Holmes rose smoothly. "Consider also the mud caked on his boots, blackish river silt liberally flecked with iron filings. The link, that precise combination, occurs only in the vicinity of the small foundries clustered near Blackfriars, not on the swept pavements of his Mayfair residence. The forge? I encountered almost identical evidence in the matter of the engineer's thumb, where the victim's footwear bore traces of hydraulic oil and fine metal swarf that betrayed the location of a secret workshop. The criminals never imagined the ground itself would remember their crime so faithfully. In that case, the chain of soil evidence shattered an otherwise perfect alibi. The chain. Therefore, Sir Reginald was not taking innocent air. He had been near an industrial district shortly before death. The link forges strong, Watson. Did you see it form? Lead to the bind. I confess the connection had entirely escaped me, until he laid it out so plainly. The fog grew denser still, carrying with it the faint cry of a newsboy hawking late editions. Holmes discovered one more item, a torn fragment of paper tucked inside the dead man's waistcoat pocket, bearing the faint scent of glove leather and a row of ciphered figures. "Another link," he said softly. and note the lungs. No water. He never entered the river alive. Killed elsewhere, brought here, and arranged to suggest accident or supernatural attack. By the time we returned to Baker Street, the evening was well advanced. The warm fire welcomed us like an old friend after the chill morgue we had briefly visited. Mrs. Hudson's roast beef sent savoury aromas drifting up the stairs, but Holmes paid it no mind. Instead, he plucked absently at the strings of his Stradivarius, producing soft, mournful notes. I poured myself a measure of sweet brandy, feeling its rich warmth spread through my chest while Holmes reflected aloud. "This phosphorescent trick puts me in mind of the Hound of the Baskervilles affair," he said, eyes half closed. "There, too, a glowing substance was employed to conjure the illusion of a supernatural hound, terrifying Sir Henry Baskerville and nearly securing an inheritance through fear. The links were the luminous paw prints, the chemical residue, and the carefully nurtured family legend, each observation forging the next until the whole chain revealed Stapleton's murderous plot. Without careful attention to the residue's artificial nature, the deception might have endured indefinitely. Here, likewise, the demon is almost certainly man-made. The link was there. Did you forge it before Holmes? His powers of observation never ceased to astonish me. We spoke briefly of possible suspects: Lady Thorne, the grieving widow, business partner Elias Blackwood, indebted nephew Arthur, resentful servant Grimshaw, and rival financier Vanderbilt. Motive could lie in any direction. As the fire crackled and rain lashed the windows, I felt the first faint tightening of logic. Looking back, I should have seen the connection sooner. Holmes reached for his chemical tray. The glass beakers clinked softly in the quiet room. Tomorrow, we forge the next links. The first link forged. The chain begins. Chapter 2. Forging Connections. I continue my record of these strange events from the morning following our grim examination beneath Southwark Bridge. The persistent October fog still clung to London like a shroud, heavy with the smell of coal smoke and damp newspapers that boys shouted on every corner. At 221B Baker Street, the coal fire burned steadily, its warmth a welcome contrast to the bitter chill outside, while the sharp scent of Holmes's tobacco filled the room once more. He was already bent over his chemical bench, the smooth glass of beakers catching the gaslight as he tested the faint green phosphorescence scraped from Sir Reginald Thorne's coat. Mrs. Hudson entered with the breakfast, hot tea steaming in porcelain cups, its bitter aroma cutting cleanly through the tobacco haze. "You've a lady visitor downstairs, Mr. Holmes," she announced. "Lady Thorne herself. Very distressed, poor soul." Holmes straightened at once, eyes gleaming with that peculiar light. "Show her up, Mrs. Hudson. The game thickens." Lady Thorne ascended the 17 steps slowly, her black morning dress rustling softly, carrying with it a faint trace of lavender water that battled the stronger smells of the room. She accepted the chair Holmes offered near the fire, her gloved hands trembling slightly against the worn leather armrest. The fire crackled as she spoke. "My husband left our house in Mayfair at 7:30 yesterday evening," she began, voice low but steady. "He said he had an urgent meeting at the bank with Mr. Blackwood, something about investments that could not wait. He never returned. The police speak of a fall, but those wounds—" She shuddered. They were not made by any accident. And the talk of a demon on the bridge. People are afraid even to cross it after dark. Holmes drew thoughtfully on his pipe, the rich tobacco smoke curling upward. Did Sir Reginald mention any particular anxiety of late? Any threats?" Lady Thorne hesitated, the texture of her handkerchief rough beneath her fingers as she twisted it. He and Mr. Blackwood had quarrelled recently over money, and his nephew Arthur, my poor sister's boy, owes considerable gambling debts. Reginald was firm about not paying them again. I noted the pallor of her cheeks, still cold from the foggy streets outside. When she had gone, her hansom cab clattering away into the mist, Holmes turned to me. "We begin forging connections, Watson. First the widow, then the partner, the nephew, the servant, and the rival. Oh, let us move." Our first call was Threadneedle Street, to the banking house of Thorne and Blackwood. The cab ride through the city was slow, wheels rumbling over wet cobbles, the air thick with horse sweat, leather and coal smoke from passing engines. Inside the bank the atmosphere was warmer, coal fires in iron grates, the scratch of pens on paper, the low murmur of clerks. Mr. Elias Blackwood received us in his private office, a stout man with a booming voice and a carefully trimmed beard. "Terrible business, gentlemen," he said, gesturing to chairs. "Reginald was my partner for 15 years. Quarrelsome at times, yes, especially over that South American railway scheme. But murder? Preposterous." Holmes wandered to the desk, running a finger along the edge where papers had recently been removed. The wood felt smooth, recently polished. "Ah, the ledger for last month's transactions," Holmes observed quietly. "Several pages appear freshly torn out." Blackwood flushed. "Merely private correspondence, nothing sinister." Holmes nodded, but his eyes lingered on a small ink smudge, still wet, on the blotter. "A link, Watson," he murmured as we left. "The ink is fresh. Someone wished those pages gone." We next rattled to Chelsea, to the modest lodgings of young Arthur Thorne. The fog was thicker here near the river, carrying the muddy reek of the Thames and the distant moan of foghorns. Arthur opened the door himself, thin, pale, dishevelled hair, cheap wool coat rough under my hand as I shook his. The room was cold, the tiny fire barely crackling. "Uncle was generous once," Arthur admitted, voice unsteady as he poured us bitter coffee from a chipped pot. "But I ran up debts at cards. He refused to cover them last month." Holmes picked up a handful of pawn tickets from the mantel. The paper felt damp and cheap. "Where were you on the night in question?" Arthur swallowed. "At the Apollo Club till midnight. Ask the porter." Holmes noted the tremor in his hands, but no trace of gunpowder or phosphorus on his cuffs. Our third visit took us to Mayfair, to the servants' entrance of the Thorne residence. Grimshaw, the butler, met us in the narrow back passage that smelled strongly of carbolic soap and boiled cabbage. He was a big, surly man with rough hands and a fresh scratch across his knuckles. "Master could be hard," Grimshaw grunted, "but I was here all evening, polishing silver till 10, then bed." Holmes examined the scratch closely. "Recent," he remarked. "Oh, from what?" "Roses in the garden," Grimshaw answered shortly. "Pricked myself." Holmes made no reply, but I saw his gaze flick to the man's boots. Clean, no river mud or iron filings. Finally, we called upon Mr. Vanderbilt, the financier who had long competed with Thorne for railway contracts. His office near the Strand was bright with gaslight, smelling faintly of chemicals and gunpowder from a small laboratory adjoining. Vanderbilt was lean, sharp-featured, and laughed coldly at our questions. "Thorne undercut me on the last tender. Yes, but kill him. Ridiculous. I was at my club." Holmes noticed a vial of yellowish powder on a shelf, similar in hue to our phosphorescent sample. He also picked a single silky thread from the carpet near the door. "Interesting weave," Holmes said softly as we departed. Matches the fibre caught in the bridge mud." Back at Baker Street as evening fell, rain began to lash the windows in earnest. The fire roared, hot tea steamed once more, and I tasted the sweet edge of brandy Holmes poured for us both. He paced before the hearth, connecting the morning's observations. Lady Thorne buys theatrical phosphorus for charity tableau. Innocent enough. Blackwood's torn ledger pages suggest concealment. Arthur's alibi may hold, but his desperation does not vanish. Grimshaw's scratch is too conveniently explained. Vanderbilt keeps chemicals that glow in darkness. Holmes stopped, eyes bright. "Links multiplying, Watson. The powder ties to Vanderbilt or Blackwood. The torn paper to the bank. The scratch perhaps to a struggle. The thread to Vanderbilt's carpet." I leaned back in my chair, of the leather warm from the fire. "But which chain holds?" Holmes smiled thinly. "That we shall discover tomorrow when we return to the bridge with fresh eyes. More links await forging." "The connection seems invisible. Can you see it? What chain would you build from these observations? Watson missed it. Did you?" The streets below echoed with footsteps and the occasional clatter of a late hansom. Holmes took up his violin, plucking a few slow, thoughtful notes. Links forging. The chain takes shape. Chapter 3. The Chain Grows. I resumed these notes on the morning after our round of interviews, when the fog still refused to lift from London streets, and hung thick with the mingled smells of coal smoke and river mud. At 221 B. Baker Street the coal fire had been freshly stoked, its warmth pushing back the bitter chill that crept in at every window frame. Holmes stood by the chemical bench, the smooth glass of his test tubes catching the gaslight as he examined the greenish phosphorescent residue once more. The sharp scent of tobacco from his pipe blended with the faint bitter steam rising from the pot of tea Mrs. Hudson had just left on the side table. "We returned to Southwark Bridge this morning, Watson," Holmes announced, setting the vial down with decision. "In daylight, the scene may yield what darkness concealed." I nodded, swallowing a last sip of hot tea, its bitterness grounding me against the day's uncertainties, and we descended the 17 steps to hail a hansom. The cab rattled over cobbles slick with overnight rain, wheels hissing through shallow puddles, while foghorns moaned mournfully from the direction of the Thames. Arriving beneath the bridge, we found the police cordon still in place. 2 constables stamped their feet against the cold, their breath clouding in the damp air. The foreshore mud lay exposed by the low tide, black and glistening, its surface pocked with footprints now half erased by the retreating water. Holmes knelt at once, heedless of the muck that clung to his knees, and produced his lens. The air tasted of salt and decay. A distant ship's bell clanged faintly. "Here, Watson, a footprint the constables overlooked." He indicated a deep impression some yards from where the body had lain. The print was larger than Sir Reginald's neat boot marks, the sole showing a distinctive pattern of iron hobnails. Observe the depth and the scatter of filings pressed into the mud. This man carried unusual weight, or wished to appear to do so. I crouched beside him. The mud felt cold and sticky under my fingers. Holmes scraped a sample into an envelope, then followed the track toward the bridge supports. Lestrade appeared, his rough tweed coat damp and heavy with the river smell. "Back so soon, Holmes? We've already searched." Holmes ignored the remark and pointed upward to the ironwork. "Scrape marks on the railing. Fresh. parallel to the ground, as though something heavy was dragged across. The metal felt icy and rough under my glove. Tiny threads of silk caught on a rivet head. Holmes plucked them carefully with tweezers. Silk, not river flotsam. Someone brushed against this spot in haste. A cabman waiting nearby for fares volunteered that he had heard strange cries shortly before midnight. "Like a beast snarling, sir, but cut short." Holmes pressed him for detail. The man's breath smelled of onions and cheap ale as he spoke. We thanked him with a coin and moved to the upper roadway. Gas lamps still burned palely in the daylight fog. Footsteps of crossing workmen echoed overhead. Holmes found one more item half buried in gravel near the railing. A single kid-leather glove. Fingers torn, reeking faintly of gunpowder and phosphorus. "Crucial," Holmes murmured, sealing it in a paper packet. "The companion to this glove will tell us much." We returned briefly to the city morgue, where the chill air bit sharper than the street fog, and the carbolic scent was overpowering. Sir Reginald lay under a sheet. Holmes drew it back with steady hands. The claw marks remained hideous, 5 parallel gashes, edges already darkening. He examined them minutely. No animal hairs, no saliva traces. These wounds were made by metal, blades set in a mechanical frame perhaps, and here he lifted the cuff of the dead man's sleeve. A small brass button dangled by a thread, its surface engraved with a tiny fouled anchor. Not Thorne's crest. Someone else's. Lestrade, who had followed us, snorted. "A lost button proves nothing." Holmes's eyes gleamed. "On the contrary, consider the footprint once more. Oversized, weighted with iron filings to alter gait and mislead trackers. The link. Such a device is known among those who wish to simulate a different stature or tread, common in certain criminal circles to confuse pursuit. Udal the Forge. I recall the Musgrave ritual affair, where Brunton the butler deliberately deepened his own footprints by adding lead weights inside his boots, thus creating the illusion of a taller man crossing the lawn to the ancient elm. The chain there was elegant, the ritual verses themselves, the mathematical progression of measurements, the displaced soil showing artificial depth, and finally the weighted impressions, all forging the path to the hidden crown of Charles I. Without noticing the anomaly in stride and depth, the secret would have remained buried forever beneath the turf. The chain. Here, likewise, the oversized print and iron flecks are no accident. Our killer wore artificial lifts or weighted soles to disguise his natural tread, and he trod the foundry path near Blackfriars before coming to the bridge. But the bind is tightening, Watson. Did you spot the forgery before I named it? The bind. I shook my head, chastened yet again by the precision of his reasoning. The morgue attendant covered the body. We stepped out into the fog once more, the cold striking afresh after the refrigerated air. Evening found us back at Baker Street. The fire roared, its heat welcome after the day's damp chill. Mrs. Hudson brought up a tray of roast fowl. The savoury aroma mingled with tobacco as Holmes filled his pipe. I poured sweet brandy, feeling its warmth spread through me while rain tapped insistently at the panes. Holmes paced slowly, summarizing. The phosphorescent powder links to Vanderbilt's laboratory or Blackwood's private stock. The silk threads match Vanderbilt's carpet. The button bears Blackwood's yacht club device. I checked the directory. The glove carries both powder and gunpowder scent. The weighted footprint places someone from the Foundry district at the scene. The chain grows stronger, Watson, each observation forging the next. Holmes saw 3 links where I had seen only 2. How many did you spot? The link was there. Did you forge it before Holmes? Before Holmes explains, what does this evidence chain tell you? He set the violin beneath his chin and drew a few slow, thoughtful notes that seemed to echo the foghorns far below. The chain grows stronger. Logic binds. Chapter 4. Testing the Links. I set these observations down as the fog of the following morning still veiled London in grey, the coal smoke from 1,000 chimneys thickening the air with its acrid bite. At 221B Baker Street, the fire burned bright against the chill, and its warmth welcome after the damp streets below. Holmes had spent the night analysing samples. The smooth glass vials on his bench now held the phosphorescent powder. The silk threads and a scraping from the oversized footprint. The faint bitter steam of fresh coffee rose from the pot Mrs. Hudson had left, mingling with the ever-present tobacco scent from his pipe. "We test the chain today, Watson," Holmes declared, pacing before the hearth. "Each suspect's story must be weighed against the physical links we have forged. Weak ones will shatter. Strong ones will hold." I nodded, tasting the hot coffee, its bitterness sharp on my tongue, and we set out in a hansom, wheels clattering over wet cobbles, the foghorns low and mournful from the river. Our first test was at Lady Thorne's Mayfair residence, and the house smelled of lavender polish and coal smoke from the drawing-room grate. She received us in the black silk, her hands clasped tightly over a lace handkerchief, whose texture felt soft and worn. Holmes produced the kid leather glove found near the bridge. "Madam, your husband purchased theatrical supplies last month, phosphorus among them, for a charity entertainment. Did you handle any?" Lady Thorne paled. "I helped prepare the costumes. The powder was for glowing effects on the stage." Holmes nodded. "This glove carries traces of that same powder. Yet your hands show no stain, and your alibi, dinner with friends, is confirmed by 3 witnesses." He set the glove aside. "A weak link. It breaks. You are cleared of direct involvement." We departed in silence, the hansom rumbling toward Threadneedle Street. At the bank, Elias Blackwood awaited in his warm office, the coal fire crackling, the air thick with the ink and ledger dust. Holmes laid the brass button on the desk. Its fouled anchor engraving gleamed under the gaslight. "This was found in Sir Reginald's cuff. It matches your yacht club blazer." Blackwood's face tightened. "Impossible. I lost a button weeks ago. Must have caught on his coat during our last meeting." Holmes examined Blackwood's boots. No iron filings, no river mud. "Your alibi holds. Clerks saw you here till 10. The torn ledger pages remain suspicious, but motive alone does not forge murder. This link bends but does not break yet." Next we rattled to Chelsea and young Arthur Thorne's lodgings. The room was colder than before, the tiny fire barely flickering, the air heavy with damp wool and stale coffee. Arthur stood nervously as Holmes produced the pawn tickets. "Your gambling debts are documented, yet the Apollo Club porter confirms you remained there until 1 in the morning, well after the body was placed." Arthur exhaled in relief. "I swear I never left." Holmes checked his hands. No powder, no scratches. Desperation is a motive, but opportunity is absent. This link shatters cleanly. Grimshaw's turn came at the servants' entrance in Mayfair. The passage smelled strongly of carbolic soap and damp stone. A low fire crackled in the kitchen beyond. Grimshaw folded his arms, the fresh scratch on his knuckles now scabbed. "You claimed rose thorns," Holmes said quietly. "Yet these thorns carry no phosphorus, and your boots show no trace of the foundry mud or river silt." Grimshaw shifted. I was nowhere near the bridge." Holmes measured the man's foot against the cast of the oversized print. "Too small, even without weights. Your grudge was real, but the physical chain does not reach you. Another weak link broken." Our final test took us to Vanderbilt's office near the Strand. The laboratory door stood ajar. The sharp scent of chemicals and faint gunpowder hung in the warm air. Vanderbilt greeted us with a thin smile, but his eyes flickered when Holmes produced the silky thread. "This fibre matches your office carpet precisely, and one was caught on the bridge railing." Vanderbilt laughed shortly. "Carpets are common. Thousands have them." Holmes pointed to the shelf. "Your phosphorus vial is nearly empty. The powder on Sir Reginald's coat matches your stock in refractive index." Vanderbilt paled. "I supplied Blackwood for an experiment, nothing more." Holmes lifted a brass button from Vanderbilt's spare blazer. It matched the dead man's exactly. "This link holds firm. You are entangled, but not yet the hand that struck." Back at Baker Street as evening closed in, rain began to drum steadily against the panes. The fire roared, its heat welcome after the day's chill. I sipped sweet brandy, feeling its warmth spread through me while Holmes paced, summarizing in his low, precise voice. Lady Thorne's theatrical connection and Grimshaw's grudge were plausible red herrings, weak links that shattered under scrutiny. Arthur's debt lacked opportunity. Blackwood's button and torn pages suggest concealment, but not the act itself. Vanderbilt's chemicals and fibres tie him closely to the staging of the demon. Yet the weighted footprint and claw wounds point elsewhere. He stopped before the hearth, steepled fingers under his chin. The true chain emerges clearer now. Only one suspect remains, whose presence aligns with every physical trace: the powder, the threads, the button, the foundry mud, the mechanical wounds. The connection seems invisible. Can you see it? Before Holmes explains, what does this evidence chain tell you? Holmes saw 4 links where most would see 2. How many did you spot? Mrs. Hudson's footsteps sounded on the stairs below, bringing supper whose savoury aroma drifted up through the tobacco haze. Holmes reached for his violin, drawing a single long note that vibrated in the warm room. Weak links shattered. The true chain emerges. Just chapter 5. The chain tightens. I take up the thread of this extraordinary affair on the morning that followed our careful testing of every suspect's story. The fog had finally begun to thin, yet a damp chill still clung to the London streets, carrying the ever-present reek of coal smoke and river mud. At 221 B. Baker Street, the coal fire roared against the cold, its heat welcome as Holmes stood by the window, violin tucked under his chin, drawing slow, meditative notes that seemed to echo the distant foghorns. The sharp scent of fresh tobacco drifted from his pipe. On the table lay the accumulated evidence: the phosphorescent vial, the torn glove, the brass button, the silk threads, and the cast of the weighted footprint. A sharp rap at the door interrupted the music. Mrs. Hudson entered with a yellow telegram envelope, its paper crisp and faintly inky. Holmes tore it open, eyes narrowing as he read. "Vanderbilt has bolted, Watson. Fled his office an hour ago with a valise and a ticket for the Dover boat train. Lestrade wires that constables are in pursuit, but the man knows the back ways of the city too well." Holmes set the violin down with decision. "Then the game is truly afoot. We must move before he reaches the coast." We descended the 17 steps in haste and hailed a hansom. The cab lurched forward, iron wheels clattering furiously over the cobbles, splashing through puddles left by the night's rain. The air tasted of whetstone and horse sweat. Big Ben tolled 10 as we raced toward Blackfriars, where Vanderbilt's private laboratory adjoined an old warehouse he used for storing chemicals. We arrived to find the heavy doors ajar, a faint smell of gunpowder and phosphorus hanging in the chill interior. Footsteps echoed from deeper within, hurried, uneven. Holmes motioned me to silence, and we slipped inside. The warehouse was dimly lit by narrow windows high in the walls. Barrels and crates cast long shadows. A figure darted between them, Vanderbilt, valise in hand, coat flapping. He saw us and turned, producing a small revolver. The metallic click of the hammer sounded sharp in the quiet. "Stay back, Holmes." Vanderbilt's voice cracked with desperation. "This is no concern of yours." Holmes advanced steadily, hands open. "On the contrary, sir. The chain already binds you to the staging of Sir Reginald's death. The powder, the threads, the button. But you are not the hand that wielded the claws. Tell us where Blackwood is." Vanderbilt laughed bitterly, and the sound echoing off iron pillars. "Blackwood? You think I protect him? He paid me to supply the phosphorus and the mechanical device, a set of spring-loaded steel talons he designed himself. Said it was for a theatrical jest. I never dreamed." His finger tightened on the trigger. I lunged forward. My shoulder struck Vanderbilt's arm as the pistol discharged. The shot cracked deafeningly, the sharp reek of gunpowder filling the air. The bullet buried itself harmlessly in a wooden beam. Holmes closed the distance in an instant, wrenching the revolver away with practiced ease. Vanderbilt crumpled to his knees on the cold stone floor, breath coming in ragged gasps. Lestrade and 2 constables burst through the doors moments later, boots pounding. "Well done, gentlemen," Lestrade panted, snapping cuffs on Vanderbilt's wrists, and the metal clinked coldly. "We'll take him to the yard, but what of Blackwood?" Holmes knelt beside a crate Vanderbilt had been attempting to move. Beneath a tarpaulin lay a ledger, pages torn to match those missing from the bank, and a peculiar brass and steel apparatus, 5 curved blades mounted on a spring frame, designed to fit over a man's hand like a gauntlet. The metal felt cold and smooth under Holmes's fingers. Faint traces of river mud still clung to the base. "Blackwood's workshop," Holmes said quietly. "He contrived the demon here, near the foundries where he could obtain iron filings to weight his boots and disguise his tread." He opened the ledger. Entries in Blackwood's precise hand detailed embezzlement from Thorne's accounts. Thousands siphoned over months. The fraud discovered only days before the murder. Vanderbilt, who was still on his knees, spoke in a low voice. He came to me frantic after Thorne confronted him, said he would ruin him unless the money was repaid. Blackwood begged for something to frighten the man, make him hesitate. I gave him the powder and helped modify the claw device. I swear I never thought he would kill." Holmes rose. "You supplied the means. He supplied the malice. The chain tightens around the true author." We left Vanderbilt to Lestrade's men and returned to Baker Street, the hansom ride slower now, rain beginning to patter once more on the roof. In our sitting room, the fire burned hot. I poured sweet brandy, its rich warmth steadying my pulse after the morning's violence. Holmes paced before the hearth, summarizing the breakthrough. The residue on the glove, phosphorus mixed with foundry dust peculiar to Blackfriars, ached the link. Only Blackwood had regular access to both the chemical stores and the industrial site, where the iron filings could be obtained unnoticed. The forge? Recall the affair of the Valley of Fear. There, too, a man used the dust of his trade to mask movements, while a secret brand and coded messages chained past crimes to present vengeance. The links were the coal mine grime on the dead man's sleeve, the perforated card left as warning, and the American cipher that connected Scourers to Vermissa Valley. Without tracing each trace to its origin, the murderer would have escaped under the cover of coincidence. Here, likewise, the dust, the powder, and the mechanical claws form an unbroken sequence pointing to one man, the chain. Therefore Blackwood is our quarry. No escape now. The chain binds him fast. Can you feel it tighten, Watson? At the bind, Holmes saw 3 links where earlier I had seen fragments. How many did you spot? The link was there. Did you forge it before Holmes? What chain would you build now that the quarry runs? Mrs. Hudson's footsteps sounded on the stairs, bringing hot supper whose savoury aroma cut through the lingering gunpowder scent in my memory. Holmes resumed his violin, the notes slow and triumphant. The chain tightens. No escape now. Chapter 6. Links to the Past. I continue this narrative on the afternoon that followed our capture of Vanderbilt, when the London fog had finally begun to lift, though the air remained heavy with the lingering smell of coal smoke and the damp earthiness of the Thames. At 221 B. Baker Street, the coal fire burned steadily, its warmth a comfort after the chill of the warehouse chase. Holmes sat at the table, with the ledger we had recovered from Vanderbilt's crate open before him, its pages yellowed and smelling faintly of old ink and dust. The brass and steel claw device lay beside it, cold metal glinting in the gaslight, its curved blades still bearing faint traces of river mud. Mrs. Hudson brought up a tray of hot tea. The bitter steam rose as she set it down, her footsteps soft on the carpet. "You'll need something warm after that excitement, gentlemen," she said, eyeing the sinister apparatus with disapproval. Holmes nodded absently, already absorbed in the ledger entries. "These figures tell a story older than the murder itself, Watson. Blackwood's embezzlement began 3 years ago. Small sums at first, then larger, all disguised as investments in the South American railway scheme he and Thorne jointly managed. We set out for Scotland Yard, with handsome cab wheels rumbling over cobbles still slick from morning rain. The air tasted of wet stone and distant coal smoke. Big Ben told the hour as we arrived. Lestrade met us in a small office, thick with the scent of old files and carbolic. He spread a sheaf of records on the table, yellow documents from Blackwood's past. "We've pulled what we could," he said, voice gruff. "Elias Blackwood, born Elias Blum in Whitechapel, changed his name 20 years ago when he entered banking. His father was a foundry worker, hence the easy access to iron filings. But there's more. One file detailed a fraud case from 1885. Blackwood had been junior partner in a small firm that collapsed after funds vanished. The senior partner, Sir Reginald Thorne's uncle, had refused to press charges for lack of proof, but the scandal ruined Blackwood's reputation, and he rebuilt under Thorne's patronage years later, only to nurse a deep resentment. Thorne's family saved him, then humiliated him, Lestrade said. When Thorne discovered the railway embezzlement last week, Blackwood saw ruin again. Holmes traced a finger down a faded letter tucked in the file. "Here is the motive in black and white." Thorne confronted him privately at the bank, threatened exposure unless the money was repaid within days. Blackwood had no means to repay, hence the desperate plan to silence his accuser. The paper felt brittle under my touch, its ink faded but legible. We next visited a public house near Blackfriars where old foundry workers gathered. The low-ceilinged room smelled of stale ale and pipe tobacco. A small fire crackled in the grate, its heat battling the chill that seeped through the door. An elderly smith, hands rough and scarred, recognized Blackwood from a photograph Holmes showed. "Aye, he came round the works often," the man said, voice gravelly. "Said he needed iron filings for experiments. Paid well, never asked questions. Last time was 2 nights ago, seemed in a hurry." Another worker added he asked about waiting boots, said it was for a theatrical production. We laughed, thought he was mad. Their words forged another link. Blackwood had prepared the disguise in plain sight, using the very foundry where his father once laboured. Back at Baker Street as evening fell, rain began to patter against the windows once more. The fire roared. I poured sweet brandy, its rich warmth spreading through me while Holmes paced, connecting the past to the present. The ledger, the claw device, the weighted footprint, and the phosphorescent powder, all now aligned with one man. "Consider the full chain, Watson," Holmes said, stopping before the hearth. Blackwood's history of fraud links to his present theft. The link. The resentment toward the Thorne family. First the uncle's mercy that became humiliation, then the nephew's discovery, supplied the motive. The forge. This echoes the case of the naval treaty, where a man's past betrayal chained him to desperate present action. There, the missing document was stolen by a clerk whose family had once been ruined by the government's refusal to aid his father's business. The links were the debt-ridden nephew, the foreign agent's coded offer, the hidden compartment in the clock, and the faint scent of cigar smoke on the treaty paper, all forging an unbroken sequence from old grudge to new crime. Without tracing the clerk's history, the theft would have appeared motiveless. Here, likewise, Blackwood's past ruin, his present embezzlement, and his contrived demon form one continuous chain. The chain. The man we seek is no stranger. He is the architect of both his own salvation and his downfall. Holmes saw 4 links where earlier we had seen fragments. How many did you spot? The connection seems invisible. Can you see it? Before Holmes explains, what does this evidence chain tell you? He reached for his violin, drawing slow, reflective notes that mingled with the crackle of the fire and the patter of rain. The past and present had become one. Past and present, one unbroken chain. Chapter 7. The Complete Chain. I record these concluding events of the case on the evening of the day following Vanderbilt's capture, and when the fog had at last retreated from London streets, leaving only a crisp autumn chill and the faint lingering scent of coal smoke in the air. At 221B Baker Street, the coal fire burned brightly, its warmth filling the sitting room as Holmes prepared for the final act. He had sent telegrams to every principal figure in the affair: Lady Thorne, Arthur Grimshaw, Vanderbilt, now in custody but permitted to attend under guard, and Lestrade with 2 constables. The summons requested their presence at the late Sir Reginald's Mayfair residence at 8 o'clock sharp. We arrived first by hansom, wheels quiet on the damp cobbles. The house stood silent, gas lamps casting long shadows across the drawing-room, where chairs had been arranged in a semicircle before the hearth, and the air smelled of lavender polish and the faint mustiness of a room long closed. A fresh fire crackled, its heat welcome against the evening cold. One by one the parties entered. Lady Thorne in black silk, pale but composed, Arthur supporting her arm, Grimshaw stiff and wary, Lestrade escorting a handcuffed Vanderbilt, whose sharp features looked haggard under the gaslight. Holmes stood before the fire, tall and calm, hands clasped behind his back. When all were seated, he began, voice low, yet carrying clearly in the quiet room. "Gentlemen and ladies, tonight every link in this chain will be accounted for. The death of Sir Reginald Thorne was no accident, no supernatural visitation, but a calculated murder designed to appear otherwise. I shall lay the evidence before you link by link." He stepped to a small table where the physical traces were displayed under a cloth. First, the physical evidence links. The phosphorescent powder on Sir Reginald's coat matches exactly the stock kept in Vanderbilt's laboratory. Refractive index, grain size, and chemical signature identical. The kid leather glove found near the bridge carries both that powder and traces of gunpowder. Its companion was recovered from Blackwood's private desk drawer this afternoon. The brass button torn from Sir Reginald's cuff bears the fouled anchor device of Blackwood's yacht club. Its twin was missing from his blazer. The oversized footprint, weighted with iron filings from the Blackfriars foundries, matches the sole pattern of boots discovered in Blackwood's wardrobe, lifts inserted to disguise his natural tread. The claw wounds themselves were inflicted by this mechanical device. Holmes lifted the brass and steel gauntlet, its 5 curved blades gleaming coldly, found hidden in Vanderbilt's warehouse, modified at Blackwood's instruction. Vanderbilt shifted in his chair. The cuffs clinked softly. Next, the timeline links. Sir Reginald left his home at 7:30 for a supposed meeting at the bank. Bank records and clerks confirm no such meeting occurred. A cabman saw a carriage matching Blackwood's near Southwark Bridge at 9:30. The driver recognized Blackwood's profile in the gaslight. Sir Reginald's body was placed beneath the bridge shortly after 10. Post-mortem lividity proves he died elsewhere. Was transported and arranged to suggest a fall. Blackwood returned to his house by 11, his boots cleaned but still bearing faint traces of river mud and foundry dust. Lady Thorne drew a sharp breath. Arthur gripped the arm of his chair. Witness links. The cabman's testimony places Blackwood at the scene. Vanderbilt has confessed to supplying the powder and assisting with the claw device, believing it a mere frightening jest. The elderly smith at Blackfriars confirms Blackwood purchased iron filings 2 nights before the murder, asking specifically about weighting boots for theatrical effect. Grimshaw overheard Blackwood and Sir Reginald arguing violently in the study 3 days earlier, words about exposure and ruin. Grimshaw nodded once, reluctantly. Motive links. Demotive links. Blackwood embezzled thousands from the railway fund over 3 years. Entries in the recovered ledger prove it. Sir Reginald discovered the fraud last week and confronted him privately, demanding repayment or exposure. Blackwood's past, a fraud case 20 years ago involving Sir Reginald's uncle, left him with deep resentment toward the Thorne family. Ruin loomed again. Murder was his desperate solution. Vanderbilt spoke hoarsely. "I never knew he meant to kill." Holmes turned to him. "You enabled it, but the final connecting link belongs to Blackwood alone." He stepped closer to the seated man. "The mechanical claws were your design, Vanderbilt, but Blackwood wore them. The weighted boots were his idea. The phosphorescent demon glow was his staging. And the act itself, luring Sir Reginald to a quiet meeting near the bridge under pretense of settling the accounts, then striking him down with the device and dragging the body to the foreshore, was his handiwork. Every physical, temporal, testimonial and motivational strand converges on one man. Blackwood sat rigid, face ashen. For a long moment silence held. Only the fire crackled and the distant tick of a clock sounded. Then Blackwood spoke, voice cracking. "He would have destroyed me, everything I had rebuilt. I only meant to frighten him into silence. The claws were too sharp. It happened so quickly." He buried his face in his hands. The cuffs rattled. Lestrade rose. "Elias Blackwood, I arrest you for the murder of Sir Reginald Thorne." The constable stepped forward. Blackwood made no resistance as the handcuffs were checked, and he was led away. Lady Thorne wept quietly. Arthur placed an arm around her. Vanderbilt, head bowed, was taken back to custody. Holmes turned to me as the room emptied. "Every link accounted for, Watson. The chain is complete." I looked at him in quiet admiration. His powers never ceased to astonish me. The link was there. "Did you forge it before Holmes?" Holmes saw the complete chain where others saw only shadows. "How many links did you count?" Outside, hansoms clattered past in the night. The gas lamps burned steady. Every link accounted for, the chain complete. Chapter 8. Justice in Chains. I set these final scenes to paper on the morning after Blackwood's confession, and when a pale winter sun at last pierced the London fog and cast thin light across the wet cobbles of Baker Street. At 221B, the coal fire still burned, though its warmth now felt less urgent. The sharp scent of tobacco lingered from Holmes's pipe, mingling with the faint bitter steam of the coffee Mrs. Hudson had brought up earlier. Holmes stood by the window, hands clasped behind his back, watching hansoms pass below while I reviewed my notes of the previous night's dramatic gathering. A telegram arrived shortly after 9, Lestrade's familiar scrawl on the yellow form. "Blackwood in cells at Bow Street. Preliminary hearing this afternoon. Request your presence if convenient. Vanderbilt to give sworn statement." Holmes folded the paper neatly. "The chain must be secured at every link, Watson. We shall attend." We took a hansom to Bow Street Police Court, the wheels hissing over damp stones, the air carrying the fresh smell of rain-washed coal smoke and distant river mud. The courtroom was small and sombre, lit by tall windows and gas brackets. The wooden benches smelled of polish and old paper. Blackwood sat in the dock, no longer the confident banker but a hollow-eyed man in plain grey prison garb. Wrists bound by short chains that clinked softly whenever he shifted. The magistrate, a stern figure with steel-rimmed spectacles, presided over a hushed room. Lestrade stood beside the clerk's table, nodding to us as we took seats near the front. Vanderbilt, brought from the cells under guard, was called first. He spoke in a low, steady voice, recounting how Blackwood had approached him weeks earlier, desperate for a means to frighten Sir Reginald into silence over the embezzlement. "I supplied the phosphorus powder for the glow effect," Vanderbilt said, "and modified the spring-loaded claw gauntlet from theatrical props. He told me it was to scare the man into withdrawing his threat of exposure. I never imagined murder." His voice cracked on the last word. The chains on Blackwood's wrists rattled as he gripped the rail. The magistrate questioned him closely. "You knew the device could inflict fatal wounds?" Vanderbilt bowed his head. "I warned him the blades were sharp. He said he would use only the flat side. To mark, not kill." Murmurs ran through the court. The magistrate rapped for silence. Blackwood was then invited to speak. He rose slowly, chains clinking like small bells. For a moment he looked directly at Holmes, His eyes held neither defiance nor pleading, only a weary resignation. "I did not intend his death," he said, voice hoarse. "When he met me near the bridge that night, he refused any compromise. He would go to the authorities the next morning. In rage, I struck once, twice. The claws were too keen. He fell without a sound. I dragged him down to the foreshore, hoping the river would take the blame, or the foolish talk of a demon would confuse matters." He paused, swallowing. "I weighted my boots with foundry filings to alter my step, used the powder to make the wound seem inhuman. It was all planned in panic." The magistrate leaned forward. "You staged a supernatural attack to cover embezzlement and murder." Blackwood nodded once. "I thought fear would protect me longer than reason." He sat again, head bowed, and the chains lay slack across his lap. Lestrade presented the physical evidence: the ledger of stolen funds, the claw device, the glove, the button, the weighted boots, all laid out on a side table under the gaze of the court. The magistrate examined each item briefly, then announced committal for trial at the Old Bailey on charges of wilful murder and fraud. Blackwood was remanded in custody. As he was led away, the chains clinked one final time, a sound that echoed in the quiet room long after the door closed. Outside the court, Lestrade joined us on the steps. The air felt fresher, the coal smoke less oppressive in the strengthening sun. "Neatly done, Holmes," he said, offering his hand. "Scotland Yard owes you another debt. Vanderbilt will face lesser charges, accessory before the fact, but he's cooperating fully. The widow and young Arthur are cleared beyond question. The estate will pass cleanly now." Holmes inclined his head. "Justice is served when every link holds true, Inspector. The criminal is bound. The innocent walk free." We returned to Baker Street by hansom, the ride quieter than our outward journey. The sitting room welcomed us with familiar warmth, the fire crackling, the scent of Mrs. Hudson's baking drifting up from below. I poured sweet brandy. Its rich taste steadied me as I reflected on the morning's proceedings. Holmes settled into his armchair, steepled fingers beneath his chin. "Loose ends are few," he said. "The railway investors will recover most of their funds from Blackwood's seized assets. Lady Thorne intends to endow a small charity in her husband's name, perhaps to aid those ruined by speculation. Arthur has sworn off cards and means to take a junior position at another bank. Grimshaw remains in service, chastened but loyal." I looked at my friend, still astonished by the relentless logic that had forged such disparate clues into an unbreakable chain. "You saw what no one else could: the powder, the filings, the mechanical claws, all pointing to one desperate mind." Holmes smiled faintly. "Observation defeats deception, Watson. When every link is tested and none breaks, justice follows. The link was there. Did you see the final binding before the court?" Holmes saw the chain complete where others saw only mist. "How many final connections did you forge?" Outside, a newsboy cried the afternoon editions. Big Ben told distantly, the criminal bound, justice served. See Chapter 9. Links restored. I write these concluding pages several weeks after the committal proceedings at Bow Street, when the sharp chill of early winter had settled over London, and the fog returned in thinner veils, no longer hiding murder, but merely softening the gas lamps along the streets. At 221 B. Baker Street, the coal fire burned low and steady, its warmth a quiet companion to the faint scent of tobacco that always lingered in the room. Holmes had returned to his chemical experiments and violin practice. The brass and steel claw device and the phosphorescent vial had long since been handed over to Scotland Yard as exhibits. and the sitting room felt almost peaceful once more. The trial at the Old Bailey had concluded swiftly. Elias Blackwood, after pleading guilty to murder in the second degree, claiming diminished responsibility through panic and long-nurtured resentment, was sentenced to penal servitude for life. The judge, in passing sentence, remarked upon the ingenuity of the deception and the cold calculation that had turned theatrical props into instruments of death. Vanderbilt, having turned Queen's evidence and testified fully, received a term of 7 years for being accessory before the fact. His cooperation had spared him the gallows and earned him a measure of leniency. The courtroom had been crowded with reporters and curious members of society. The story of the demon of Southwark Bridge filled the newspapers for days, though the more sensational headlines gradually gave way to sober accounts of justice served. Lady Thorne emerged from the ordeal with quiet dignity. She attended the final day of the trial veiled in black, Arthur at her side, and afterward invited Holmes and me to Mayfair for tea. The drawing-room smelled of fresh lavender and polished wood. The fire crackled softly as she poured from a silver pot, the tea hot and bitter on the tongue. "I cannot thank you enough, Mr. Holmes," she said, voice steady though her eyes were still shadowed. "Reginald's name is cleared of any suggestion of scandal or misadventure. The estate is intact, the investors reimbursed from Blackwood's seized assets, and the railway scheme will proceed under new management." She turned to Arthur. "My nephew has taken a responsible post at a rival banking house. He has sworn off gambling and means to make amends for the worry he caused his uncle." Arthur coloured slightly but met my gaze. "I owe my freedom and my future to your friend's logic, Doctor. Without the chain of his evidence he forged, suspicion might have lingered on me for years." Holmes inclined his head modestly. "The evidence spoke for itself, Mr. Thorne. I merely arranged the links in their proper order." We left the house as dusk fell, the gas lamps flickering to life along the quiet square. Hansom cabs clattered past, their wheels hissing on damp cobbles. The air carried the clean scent of approaching frost mingled with distant coal smoke. In the weeks that followed, small notices appeared in the papers. Lady Thorne had endowed a modest charitable trust in her husband's memory, to assist clerks and junior bankers fallen into debt through no fault of their own. The irony was not lost on Holmes. The very weakness that had tempted Blackwood, financial desperation, would now be eased for others. Grimshaw remained in service at the Mayfair house, his position secure. When I chanced to meet him on the street one afternoon, delivering parcels for his mistress, he touched his cap with rough courtesy. "The house is quieter now, Doctor," he said, "but it's honest quiet. No more shadows in the corners." His hands, once marked by that suspicious scratch, bore only the calluses of honest labour. London itself seemed to exhale. The talk of a demon on Southwark Bridge faded into fireside tales. Crossings at night lost their terror as ordinary folk resumed their routines. The foundries near Blackfriars continued their clangour, but no more weighted boots or glowing powders issued from them for sinister purpose. The Thames flowed on, its muddy scent unchanged, bearing away the last echoes of the tragedy. One evening, as snow began to dust the rooftops, Holmes and I sat before the fire at Baker Street. The room was warm. Mrs. Hudson had brought up hot cocoa, laced with a touch of brandy. Its sweet richness a pleasant change from the usual tea. Holmes plucked idly at his violin strings, producing soft, contented notes. "The chain is restored," he remarked after a time. "Every false link broken, every true one secured. The innocent walk free, the guilty abound. Order returns to the streets, not perfect, never perfect, but sufficient for another season. I looked at my friend, the firelight catching the sharp lines of his face. And your method never fails to astonish me, Holmes. What began as a single glowing speck on a coat became an unbreakable sequence that bound a killer and freed the blameless. He smiled faintly. Observation and logic, Watson. When deception is forged link by link, truth need only follow the same path, in reverse. The connection seems invisible no longer. Can you see how every loose thread was gathered? Before the end, what final link did you forge in your own mind? Outside, the snow fell gently. Big Ben told the hour with clear, unhurried strokes. A newsboy's cry faded into the night. Order restored to London streets. Chapter 10. By the Fire at Baker Street. Several months have passed since the last echoes of the Southwark Bridge affair faded from the newspapers, and London has settled into the quiet rhythm of late winter, as snow lies thinly on the rooftops tonight, muffling the usual clatter of hansoms and the cries of late vendors. At 221B Baker Street, the coal fire burns with a steady, comforting glow, its warmth spreading through the sitting room and chasing the chill from every corner. The familiar scents of strong tobacco from Holmes's Persian slipper and the faint bitter steam of Mrs. Hudson's cocoa mingle pleasantly. The gas lamps hiss softly, casting golden pools across the worn carpet and the scattered chemical apparatus that Holmes has not yet tidied away. I sit in my usual armchair, legs stretched toward the hearth, a glass of sweet brandy in hand. Its rich warmth lingers on the tongue. Holmes occupies the opposite chair, long legs crossed, fingers steepled beneath his chin as he gazes into the flames. His Stradivarius rests on the table beside him. Earlier, he played a slow, contemplative air that seemed to weave the events of the case into melody. The evening papers lie folded on the side table, carrying only the briefest notice of Blackwood's transfer to Dartmoor and Vanderbilt's continued cooperation with the authorities. The story has run its course in the public mind. Only here, in this quiet room, does it still live vividly. Holmes breaks the silence first. A satisfying conclusion, Watson. The chain held firm from first link to last. I nod, setting my glass down. I have been reflecting on your method, Holmes. The way you took a single speck of phosphorescent powder on a dead man's coat and forged it, link by link, into an unbreakable sequence that bound the guilty and freed the innocent. He smiles faintly, eyes still on the fire. It is the science of deduction in its purest form. Every observation is a potential link. Logic forges the connection. Persistence tests its strength. In this case, the chain began with that luminous residue, uncommon, deliberate, artificial. From there we traced the powder to Vanderbilt's laboratory, the iron filings in the weighted boots to the Blackfriars foundries, the mechanical claws to Blackwood's desperate scheme, the torn ledger pages to his embezzlement, and every thread of motive back to his ancient grudge against the Thorne family. He leans forward slightly, voice thoughtful. Compare it, if you will, to the affair of the Sign of Four. There, too, a small physical trace, the pearls sent anonymously each year, became the first link. That pearl connected to the Agra treasure, the treasure to the mutiny, and the mutiny to Jonathan Small and his wooden-legged companion. And every subsequent observation, the creosote stain on the child's hand, the poisoned dart, the irregular tread on the attic boards, forged the chain until the criminal stood revealed. In both cases, deception relied on misdirection. A glowing hound to terrify, a demonic claw to confuse. Yet observation defeats such artifice every time. The ground remembers footprints, cloth retains fibres, metal bears engravings, paper keeps its ink. No lie can erase the silent testimony of material things when viewed with sufficient care. I sip my brandy again, feeling its sweetness contrast with the gravity of his words. You make it sound almost mechanical, yet there is an art to it. The intuition that selects which detail matters, or the patience to follow where it leads. Intuition guided by data. Holmes corrects gently. When you have eliminated the impossible, whatever remains, however improbable, must be the truth. In the Southwark Bridge matter, we eliminated accident, no water in the lungs, eliminated animal attack, no hairs, no saliva, eliminated the supernatural, no demon leaves brass buttons or silk threads. What remained was human malice, contrived with theatrical props and industrial scraps. The chain tightened link by link until Blackwood had nowhere left to hide. He rises and paces slowly before the fire, slippers whispering on the carpet. The true wonder is not that criminals are caught, but that so many imagine they can escape observation. They weight their boots, they daub themselves with phosphorus, they invent legends of demons, yet they forget that every step leaves a print, every substance leaves a trace, every act leaves a consequence. The science of deduction is merely the patient recognition of those consequences. He stops, turning to me with that peculiar light in his eyes. You have chronicled many such chains, Watson. Each teaches the same lesson. Truth is not hidden. It is overlooked. The careless see fragments. The careful see sequence. The careless invent stories. The careful dismantle them. I smile, warmed as much by his words as by the fire. And so, another mystery is laid to rest. The innocent resume their lives, the guilty pay their debt, and London continues. Fog, gaslight, hansoms, and all. Holmes returns to his chair, picking up the violin and drawing the bow across a single long note that lingers in the quiet room. Precisely, until the next puzzle presents itself. Another speck of powder, another anomalous footprint, another chain waiting to be forged. He sets the instrument down and raises his glass in a small salute. To observation, Watson, and to the game that never truly ends. I lift my own glass in return. To the game. The fire crackles. Outside, snow taps gently at the window panes. Big Ben tolls the hour with clear, unhurried strokes, its sound carrying across the quiet city. Until the next chain forges, dear listener. The game continues,